no sense.
Howdy, and welcome to Wise About Texas, the Texas History Podcast. This is your host, Ken Wise. Thanks very much for tuning in today for a little bit of Texas history. Been a lot of activity over here at Wise About Texas World Headquarters. First, I want to say thank you to everybody who provided some feedback from the last episode when I was sort of rolling out the idea of doing some golf history focused podcasts, some Texas golf history stuff. The responses were overwhelmingly positive, even from people who really don't play golf. So I think what's going to probably happen is I will probably start a separate podcast for Texas golf history. But if the history is general enough and interesting enough, I'll probably run it both places. So there will be some episodes on this main Wise About Texas that are golf related, but some of the more narrow golf episodes with maybe a more narrow interest or maybe very, very golf specific, I'll keep to a separate golf history feed, and we'll just see how that works. But there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about in that regard, so I will be asking you to share that with your golfing friends, and hopefully this summer we'll get that up and running. In the meantime, there's one other thing that I need to mention at this point, because this has come up a couple of times, and it always does every election year that I'm on the ballot. Most of you listeners know my day job is as a judge on the 14th Court of Appeals, and it is election season for yours truly, so I'll be on the ballot this November, and I keep that separate from this podcast. This is about Texas history. It's not about politics unless it's about historic politics. So if you want information on the election that I'm participating in, which is a 10-county district, then go to Wise for Texas or my Justice Ken Wise Facebook. Both of those are Facebook pages, and you can get political information, or you can email me directly and we can talk about that. But we're going to keep that off the podcast. Okay, today I want to talk about another Texas governor, and this is Richard Koch. Again, this podcast originated through a panel that I hosted, moderated, and was the commenter for at the recent Texas State Historical Association meeting. And Mr. Rosser Koch Newton presented on his new book about Governor Richard Koch. And so let me introduce a little bit about Richard Koch, and then we'll play the interview. Richard Koch was both governor and a United States senator from Texas. He was born in Virginia in 1829. He became a lawyer, and then he moved to Waco in 1850, where he got married. He was appointed, one of his first governmental appointments was in 1859, and there was a commission to determine whether the reservation system for the Comanches was working. It, of course, was not, and Governor Koch was on that commission to decide whether the Comanches should continue on the reservation or whether that system just wasn't going to work for Texas. He was also a delegate to the Secession Convention, participated in the Civil War, was wounded, came back, and was appointed a district judge. Now, this is interesting. He was appointed a district judge after the Civil War, despite the fact that he had served on the side of the Confederacy. So he was obviously very well respected. He was elected to the Supreme Court. I'll let Mr. Newton tell you more about that. And then one thing that longtime listeners of this podcast are familiar with Governor Koch was the election of 1873. Now, this was one of the frankly funniest, although it was a serious situation, election stories in a long time. Go back and listen to episode 9 to learn about the election of Richard Koch over Reconstruction Governor E.J. Davis and the mayhem that resulted from that election. We're going to learn in this interview about Koch's term as governor and some of his policies. His admirers came to call Richard Koch Old Brains, which is a pretty good nickname. I mean, there certainly could be worse. And then Governor Koch eventually passed away in 1897. So enjoy this interview with Richard Koch's relative, Rosser Newton. Well, Mr. Newton, thanks so much for joining us today on Wise About Texas.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, this ought to be an interesting conversation about who I think is one of the more interesting governors, certainly served during a very interesting time in Texas history, Richard Koch. Talk first, if you would, though, about your background and your connection to Governor Koch.
Well, I'm an indirect descendant of Governor Koch. He died. He died. He died without issue, and his nephew Henry Koch came to Dallas in the 1880s, and we're all descended from him. It was a fascinating story. The book was about 35 years in the making. In 1990, along with my girlfriend at the time, who subsequently became my wife, we did a factual outline of Governor Koch's life. It wasn't in any form or fashion a good book, but it did provide a lot of factual detail. And then, life intervened, business, work, marriage, children. And it wasn't until 2022 that I came back to the idea of finishing the book. And at that time, I partnered with a woman named Carla Keenast, whose attention to detail and deadlines in particular helped us get this thing done. At the time, I was still running an investment bank for energy companies, and the two were often in competition for my time.
Well, that writing a book obviously is an arduous process. What'd you do when you started? I mean, when you finally said, "I'm going to start this," how does that look? And what was your process?
Well, first of all, it was important to us that, given the familial relationship, that this not be a family tribute book. We wanted it to be well researched, have a great bibliography, and be factual in all respects. So what we did is we sat down, we outlined the book, or what we thought were going to be the chapters. Turns out we were about 40% correct. We kind of changed it as we went along, and then we, the digitalization of information on the internet is a big boon to historians today, and so we availed ourselves of as much of that as we could find. And then we also put boots on the ground in the form of graduate students at Baylor, Texas A&M, the University of Texas, and the State Historical Archives, and had them send us everything that they could find there, and then we scoured our family archives. The Koch family came to Williamsburg, Virginia, in the 1720s, and so there's a lot of information there. Their house is still preserved in the Colonial Williamsburg Park, and if you've never been to Colonial Williamsburg, I highly recommend it. It's a great experience. So anyway, we assembled all that information and set about writing a book.
Well, what other than obviously the family connection to a governor of Texas is a significant fact. Was that the sole reason that you were motivated to write about Governor Koch, or were there other reasons?
No, I found it compelling because for two reasons. Number one, it's an under-researched part of Texas history. And the TSHA program that we did was largely on that part of Texas history, and I thought that was a great tribute to those three governors. But anyway, like I said, it was underrepresented, and also it was just darned fascinating. You had a state which, like many other states in the South, was in transition and turmoil, and particularly in Texas, under Governor E.J. Davis, you had almost the militarization of county law enforcement, and I found it fascinating that one man, Governor Koch, was able to return local control to politics. And those are themes that we've been talking about in Texas since Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, and they're still big themes today, certainly.
Certainly.
I deal with them personally in my legislative work in connection with the judiciary. So when did Richard Koch come to Texas?
He came in 1850, and he was the second lawyer in Waco because, lawyers can't make any money if they don't have anybody to fight
with. That's exactly.
And he married the daughter of a prominent planter, a woman named Mary Horn. And there's a great story, I put it in the book, that he saw her getting out of a carriage one day and saw her ankles, which apparently in Victorian times was the pinnacle of temptation.
Scandalous.
Scandalous indeed.
And so he marries and begins his law practice in Waco. And then what was sort of his first foray into politics?
It really started in 1859 when Governor Runnels appointed him to a commission to talk about how to resettle the Indians in East Texas. The growing white settlements in Northeast Texas were bumping into, and so that was really when he started politics. And of course, that was just before the Civil War began, and so he did that and a couple of other things, but that was really his first foray into politics.
And then the Civil War, of course, interrupted the entirety of American society. Was he caught up in that?
He was an officer in Spates Brigade, served mostly in Arkansas and Louisiana. He was shot in the chest in the Battle of Bayou Bourbeau. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but survived that chest wound and rejoined his company. But yeah, he was in the thick of it from the beginning.
And then when he came home, did he get right back into politics, or just start his law practice back? Or what?
I think he tried to start his law practice, but he was appointed to the Texas Supreme Court for a little while, and because he had such a strong, non-centralized control of government philosophy, he was removed by General Sheridan as an impediment to Reconstruction. And then, So
I hate to interrupt you, but he served in the Confederate Army and then served in a Reconstruction in a position with the state Supreme Court right after the war as Reconstruction began. Is that right?
Right.
He was obviously very well respected.
Yeah. He had also been appointed a state district judge, I think, before that. But he was very well respected as a fair man, a smart man, and a guy that just tried to get things done the right way. I'm sure in your judicial work, you look for guys like that as well, even today.
Well, that's what the system really demands. And then when you but when you throw politics on top of it, as judges today, we're all elected in partisan elections, and that creates all kinds of problems. As did, I would imagine, it did for Governor Koch. You said he was removed. He was so despite his integrity, politics intervened in a slightly different way.
Yeah, absolutely. He was definitely fired by General Sheridan, and then he practiced law a little bit. And then in 1874 was elected governor. That was after the Amnesty Act in 1872, which allowed former Confederate officers, of course, of which he was one, to hold state office. Well,
and that was a very famous election. I actually covered that earlier in this several years ago on this podcast, the 1873 election, where Governor Koch was elected overwhelmingly, and Governor E.J. Davis refused to leave office both politically and also physically, and locked himself in the governor's office, and an armed conflict ensued. So the listeners can go back and hear that. It's a fantastic story. And as I recall, Governor Koch was inaugurated despite troops being in the Capitol.
That's true. I've got to tell you, I can't walk up Congress Avenue towards the Capitol in Austin at any time without thinking about that story, and the courage and the gumption that it took to do what they did on the January 17th, 1874. But yeah, they got ladders, entered the Capitol through the second story, sat, swore in the House, swore in the Senate. Then they ratified the election. And all the while, Davis was in his office, barricaded with I think it was the Travis long rifles, uh, um, guarding his position. But that was a heady denouement to a tough election. I will note that Koch got almost two-thirds of the vote, so it was overwhelmingly in his favor.
Well, in the Supreme Court that was sitting, which would have been the Supreme Court that replaced the court Governor Koch was fired from, issued a ruling purporting to overturn that election based on the placement of a semicolon, and is known throughout Texas legal history as the semicolon court. And to this day, lawyers very rarely, if ever, cite any authority from that court. So that little scenario had a lasting effect on the Texas legal system.
That's true. That's true. But it was also a precursor of some of the electoral hijinks that we've had in modern times as well.
Well, that's for sure. And it led directly to the fact that all officials in Texas are now elected. So he's elected governor. Give us a sense of what his policies were and kind of how he governed.
Well, I'd say it was really three things. The first was he was committed to the decentralization of power. Davis had collected a lot of the power, even at the county level, into the governor's office, and Texas was for sure a less free place at that time. So plank number one was to decentralize and return control to the county level and the city level, and he was largely successful doing that. The other thing he did was the state was in a tremendous amount of debt at the time, and his slogan for getting control of that was "Pay what you owe and pay as you go." And in so doing, he I think the debt was like 25-30% cut back by the time he left the governorship to become a United States Senator in 1876.
Well, good conservative fiscal policy is always a good thing. What other issues did he deal with as governor?
Railroads. During the centralization of power under Governor Davis, the railroads had kind of been able to creep in to make some pretty good deals. I think he reformed those. But I think those were the big issues. He also sponsored the Constitutional Convention in 1876, which is the outcome of that is the Constitution we still use, even though it's been amended a bunch of times.
Well, and let's also not fail to mention the largest impact, which is opening my alma mater, Texas A&M University.
Absolutely. And graduates still speak those famous words.
So he was elected senator. When did that occur? U.S. Senator.
Shortly after the Constitutional Convention. I think it was 1876, 1877. And he served until the mid 1890s. So he was there for a very long time. And he was really well respected. His nickname was Old Brains.
Well, there could be worse nicknames, I suppose.
Particularly today.
So, what were some of his accomplishments or projects in the U.S. Senate?
I'm probably less knowledgeable about that, but one of the main things that he did was, try to represent Texas in the South in a fair and in that national interest way. The but yeah, but we didn't spend too much time on that.
Well, he came home you said 1894. Is that what
Yeah,
you said? Yeah. And he came back to Waco, I presume.
he did. He came back to Waco and resumed his farming his farming. The story goes is that was that he got caught in a storm in November, December, or sometime when it was really cold, and caught pneumonia and died from that. But he was definitely farming again at that point. And and the farm, we found it on a map in Waco, is now pretty much developed as housing. It's right on the Brazos River down there, south of town.
The fate of so many farms like that, unfortunately.
Right.
So he died not too long after he got back from Washington, I guess.
He did just a couple 3 years.
Um, well, that's an incredible record of service. What are, in your mind, what are some of Governor Koch's and Senator Koch's most significant contributions to the state?
Well, I think the Constitution of 1876, which sort of codified local control, was a big win, and and then also just kind of settling down the state after Reconstruction. I mean, I think that might have been one of his biggest achievements. I mean, during Governor Davis's tenure, I mean, things were pretty volatile in the state, and that makes it tough to grow and do business and all this other stuff. And I think just kind of toning it down and returning to a sense of adjusted normalcy, was probably very, very important.
No question about that. What was there anything that surprised you that you learned during this process of writing this book?
Well, I mean, I think I mentioned it's at TSHA. The story was that Coate got sent away from Williamsburg by his dad for being a rascal, and he got in a fair amount of trouble around Williamsburg, and the family's answer was to send him to Texas. So I found the contrast between the younger, Richard Koch and the older Richard Koch to be very, very interesting. He was a very disciplined man, a very stern man. He was a big man. He was about 6'5", 6'6", and when you compare that to what he was in his 20s in Williamsburg, I found that very, very interesting.
Well, and another perspective on that might be that Texas made room. Texas is a big place, and it always has attracted big personalities, and as so many people of that type have flourished and continue to flourish here with the Texas spirit. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, he definitely brought a spirit of entrepreneurialism and independence with him, and he studied at William and Mary Law School under one of the leaders of states' rights thoughts, And I think that just stayed with him his whole career.
Sounds like it made a big impression on him for sure. One thing I wanted to ask you, did you, in studying this and learning about his times and the times around him, but also his contribution to shaping those times, were there any other interesting Texas history questions that were raised in your mind that you might be thinking about?
Good question. I mean, I look at a lot of what he accomplished as the predicate for what Texas became. Independent, entrepreneurial, and so forth. And so, I spent a little bit of time thinking about what that means in the context of today. And there might be another book in there on that subject. I don't know.
Well, it sounds like there is. I was going to ask you what your next project is, but I think you just answered that.
Well, I'm spending a lot of time on 3 other philanthropic projects, and so that's really what I'm doing.
Well, one specifically I want to ask you about before I let you go is the Alamo Letter Society. Tell our listeners about the Alamo Letter Society.
This is a great project. About 3 years ago, one of my neighbors was on a family vacation down to the Alamo, and they were looking at the Travis's victory or death letter in front of the Alamo Chapel. And she looked at her dad and said, "Dad, why do people have to come to San Antonio to see this letter?" And so her dad, who lives down the street from me here in Dallas, came over to my house one Sunday afternoon. I was watching football. He walked in. He said, "Rosser, you're in for half." I had no idea what that meant, but I just said, "Okay, Bill, no problem." So that's how it got started. And what we're doing is we're placing a 4 by 3 foot bronze replica plaque, really beautiful, of Travis's last letter from the Alamo, the victory or death letter, in every Texas county courthouse, all 254 of them. And we've got about 75 done now. And Lieutenant Governor Patrick signed on as honorary chairman, which was a big help. And we're making great progress now.
Well, that's wonderful, and I think that's just one of the great Texas projects that everybody can really be involved in. Well, okay, let me thank you for this time today. I want to tell our listeners the book is Richard Koch, Texan, by Rosser Newton. And where can we get this book?
Well, it's on Amazon. I guess you can also call Stony Creek Publishing as well, but most people just collect it on Amazon.
Well, it's a great read. I really appreciate you doing it, and Richard Koch deserves some study, and you've done him proud with this book. And before we go, tell folks where they can find out about the Alamo Letter Society.
Well, we've got a website, www.alamolettersociety.com, I think, and but if you're civic minded in a county where we haven't done this yet, please contact us, because what we do is we find a county chairman to work with the county judges and so forth in each county, and from there go ahead and get the plaque built, and then the dedication ceremonies have been great. We've got a descendant of an actual descendant of Davy Crockett, who comes and reads the letter, which is really, really moving. And a lot of the counties have done parades and other really cool stuff to honor Travis and the heroes from the Alamo.
Well, that's just a wonderful project, and it's been wonderful to have you today, Rosser. Thanks for your work in Texas history, and thanks for your work around Texas with the Alamo Letter, and thanks for joining us today on Wise About Texas.
Well, thank you, Judge. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Wise About Texas. Thanks for listening today. If you want to support the preservation and promotion of Texas history, go to patreon.com/wiseabouttexas. Find us on Instagram and Twitter at Wise About Texas, and like and share the Wise About Texas Facebook page if you get a chance. Also, if you like this podcast, go to Apple or Spotify or whatever platform you're on and leave a review. That helps people find the show. Well, thanks again for listening. Go out and do something for Texas today. And until next time, God bless Texas, and we'll see you down the road.